Hi, folks. So another thinking out loud with slides, or perhaps this is a little bit more remembering out loud. So this is something that I was reflecting on with my colleague David Perring, who's going to be joining myself and other Fosway colleagues at our first Fosway symposium event for a number of years. And I was remembering with him back to an event that I attended as a corporate attendee, I guess, as a head of digital for the BBC Academy at the time. And we had a conversation in one of the round tables about the fact that consumer web products just not working in a workplace learning context, or not being tried perhaps in a workplace learning context. That I think that was possibly 8, 9, even 10 years ago. And I just wanted to come back to that theme, sort of reflect on it a little here, and see the extent to which some of that conversation has changed. So I want to first of all share, what are some of the key characteristics. These aren't all the characteristics of successful consumer products. There are many more. Thinking more about the learning context, YouTube being the granddaddy of web products in many respects. Certainly, probably the most popular learning product by at some distance. And what are the characteristics of the success of YouTube in that context? What's a destination of choice? People want to go there, spend an enormous amount of time there, more time streaming on YouTube than any other platform, and on TV more than any other platform. The creator incentives are clear. I think anyone can do it, and lots of people want to. And if you're good at it, you can make some money out of it, and some people can make a good living out of being a YouTube creator. I think it's very hard work, but it's possible. So that's a sort of economically viable route for content creators as solo or small organizations. And that creates a sort of economically viable long tail and a great deal of volume of content. I suppose the opportunity for global niches, etc. So there's a huge amount of content out there, that's well served by an algorithm to present the best, however defined, perhaps the most attractive for advertising in some instances. But that huge, that sort of viable long tail is really, really significant alongside, YouTube being the second most popular search engine in the world, or the second most used search engine, and the metadata that supports that. So this sort of high volume of good content that's useful, that you can learn from and with, or that helps you learn. And it can also be distributed as well. So you can find and do find YouTube content, all over the place, in fact, curated into many workplace learning products. I think those are some of the characteristics of why YouTube works well. Thinking about TikTok, which obviously when I first had that conversation with David, it wasn't around at the time. Again, this is another destination of choice. People want to go to TikTok and are drawn there and spend a lot of time there. Perhaps this is the home of doom scrolling. I think one of the things that's really interesting about TikTok, not just TikTok as we'll see, but is the feed. And it's almost a lack of choice on TikTok actually, but this incredibly powerful feed experience that just sort of seems to kind of find stuff that you're interested in, want to watch more of, and sort of draws you in, and the data that supports that, and that kind of sense of total personalization from that data. But I think the idea of a feed is such a powerful theme. I don't know that we can do that in a workplace context. We'll come back to that. And clearly, the similarly creator incentives. If you're good on TikTok, you can you can create a good following, and it's economically viable again, for that that long tail of content and that content volume, which allows for that sense of kind of almost endless personalization. So there's some really important dynamics there. I was trying to work out, how to present this. I was sort of thinking about the notion of social media, should it still exist, rather than just a content feed. And again, I think, sort of thinking about some of these examples in those logos of destinations of choice. These are places we go. They're apps that we turn to deliberately, and are drawn to, and in some instances, perhaps sort of sadly addicted to. Again, this sort of total personalization of the feed. The feed takes care of what you see and what you see next, for good or ill. And that feed, again, is sort of fueled by that vast volume of data. And again, sort of the network effects and an economically viable long tail, from all of these services. But I think there's something interesting about these, perhaps this is true of all of them, which creators want to make the content. And I don't believe that's true in the workplace context, but we'll return to that. And you can say whatever you like, for good or ill. You can pretty much, post whatever you like on these platforms. The platforms are very careful to position themselves as a platform, not a publisher, just to enable the ability to express. So that allows for anything goes, and that's clearly not true in a workplace context. I kind of wondered whether to add Netflix or not, because the idea of a Netflix of learning is sort of, there's a dead horse to flog here, but I'm going to flog it anyway, I suppose. So that it's a destination of choice, perhaps one of the most powerful entertainment destinations that we've ever seen, and it's filled with a large volume of desired content. That's why it's different from the learning content. That's why the Netflix for learning is a bonkers thought, because Netflix is full of desired content and it's full of data that's very, very well used to personalize and then navigate. So the idea of this kind of sort of scrolling tiles idea is only makes sense because you want to be there and you're trying to choose something you want to do, which isn't that metaphor does not extend to the workplace learning context. So I've put Netflix in just for the record, really. So I was wondering, like, well, so what are the implications then for workplace learning? And this is perhaps sort of recalling some of the themes of that early conversation many years ago with David at that my first Fosway symposium, anyway. And I think it's kind of interesting. I wonder if the SaaS business model, is a kind of poor incentive for product usage by comparison. So, these examples here, require the economic model requires high volumes of usage from a lot of people, a high frequency and high depth of usage. So many impressions, many clicks from many people, and many visits and return visits. SaaS is a software licensing per user model, over a multi-year period. Doesn't matter so much, does it? If your system's in, you've sold it, then optimization is good for customer success, but it's not really economically incentivized in terms of content usage or content creation. So on the creator side and the user side, the incentives are quite different. The freedom of choice, I think, drives the user experience in our consumer behavior. Obvious point, but I don't, we're not in a free choice environment in the workplace learning context. And I think for learning systems, actually, born of the assignment of learning, that you will do these courses and this content is recommended, and built on that, the assignment of curated playlists, etc. I think that freedom of choice is quite different. So I think the behavior patterns are different. The behavior patterns are just different in the workplace anyway. None of these are learning tools, but they're very good for learning, apart from Netflix, which is not very good for learning. But I think it's true of the others, and they're very well used for learning purposes, both for those who want to help people learn and for us, as learners, sort of helping us learn as well. So I think that's kind of an interesting observation about these high volume products that are used for learning that actually don't have a learning intent. I think there's some thoughts about what does that mean for AI technologies as well. Despite the fact that I didn't want to mention AI, there I go. I think there's a few related points here. But, can that powerful feed, on TikTok and Facebook, Instagram, etc., can that be replicated in a workplace context? I don't know that we have enough high volumes of data that are required for that, and we don't have the high volumes of content that are required for that kind of feed. So I think we need a different metaphor for that, different kind of selection and recommendation, and those signals of relevance need to be very strong in the workplace context. We're not dealing with those volumes of choice, and we're not dealing with those choice patterns in terms of behavior from consumers as well. So I think that creates a very different environment. I think perhaps sort of lastly, because this perhaps is getting a little bit long, the incentives for content creators are very different in the workplace context. So content that's used for workplace learning tends to be commissioned. So either commissioned by off-the-shelf library providers and then sold on, commissioned or made internally as part of a job or as part of a purchase of a service. It's not this idea of this kind of endless quest for engagement, relevance, and attention that drives the constant relevance and renewal of those feeds in these other services. And I think that feels like a really important factor here. What are the incentives and particularly economic incentives for content creation in the workplace context? I think they're very different, which plays into the volume. It plays into this sort of I suppose the idea that we need to make it as easy as possible to create content that's as quick as possible as well. And I think that those incentives are quite different. Try to help and persuade people to help us make that content, which is not true for these other services. And I think in the workplace context, this is my friend Russ Hendy, who I spoke with earlier this morning, in fact. So I'm remembering you here, Russ. Always said that in a workplace context, actually, these tools need strong signals of relevance. You're expected, in a workplace context, there should be that recognition and understanding of your context and the signals of relevance for you, rather than that broad sense of choice and discovery, which I think a lot of other consumer products are rest on. Anyway, so there's some of those thoughts about those differences. I'm interested to know what you think. How is this shifting? Have I misread this idea of the economic incentives and the business models? I'd love to know, if you're a vendor, then how do you see that? But also, if you're on the corporate side, do you recognise this? Does this create any issues for you? you. Let me know what you think.